That's an awesome introduction, Robert. Well, before I start, I wanted to thank Robert for giving me the chance of sharing with you this amazing topic, this super interesting topic that just has been overcoming one of the main interests in my early career. And I also want to thank you guys for showing up, even though it wasn't possible for me to be physically there. And having said that, today we're going to review four major topics, which are like what makes Chile an area of high concern for biological conservation, and also why it's considered to be one of the global biodiversity hotspots. And also review what is the current state of restoration ecology initiatives in Chile, and what are the main challenges that the government of Chile is going to face in the not so distant future. And yeah, well, Robert already introduced me, and he basically said everything that I was planning to say from introduction. So let's continue with the first slides of the presentation. And as he said, I studied the dynamics of lodgepole pine invasion on Araucaria forest. I don't know if any of you knew that tree before. It's known as a monkey puzzle tree, and it has a really distinctive shape, and it's really cool to work in this kind of high elevation, really isolated ecosystem. And it is also as well here while I'm going to be working with whitebark pine. So I named this presentation as major bottlenecks for forest restoration for natural forests in Chile. But before even getting there, I wanted to give some sort of background for you to understand why Chile is such an important place in terms of its natural heritage. So I split this presentation in four major topics, which are the concept of Chile as a biogeographical island, also the land use change that central Chile has undergone during the past 3 to 4 decades, and why it's so important for the government of Chile to start implementing restoration initiatives, and what are the main challenges that they will have to overcome in the not so distant future. And so first of all, I wanted to know, what is the first things that come to your mind when I said Chile? What is the first thing that you can think of? Can you help me with that, Robert, please?
Yes, so what do you think? And I will actually be the moderator of this. What do you think when he talks about Chile? Mines.
Mine? Yeah, that's a good guess, yeah.
Wow.
Something else?
What is that? Diversity. They said diversity.
Diversity, that's a really good one. So natural features, yeah. So during the past 7 months here, I've been trying to gather all these references that my friends and colleagues have been giving me about Chile, and I categorized them in three topics. The first one is that Chile is considered a really important wine producer country, and it has a couple like celebrities in like soccer players, and also a couple really beautiful cities that are by the sea like Valparaiso or Santiago. The other topic is their natural features. I'm pretty sure that some of you have heard of Torres del Paine, which is in southern Patagonia, or the Moon's Valley in San Pedro de Atacama, which is like 4,000 kilometers north from that. And the third topic is natural disturbances. Chile is well known for being a country that has been affected by different disturbances over the 10 years, like massive wildfires in 2017, volcanic eruptions in 2015, and also a massive 8.8 earthquake in 2010. A fun fact that earthquake happened 3 days before my first day in college, before I entered the engineering school in electronic engineering. And that was kind of a holy sign that probably I was not actually going through the right path. And here I am, 10 years after, in the other side of the world in a different career. So probably was a good sign, or probably not. So that's what I would describe Chile in a nutshell. But what's the deal with the natural features and natural heritage of Chile? Why do we consider as a biogeographical island or the last southern glacial refuge? Well, as you might have seen or heard of Chile, it's a really long and narrow country that expands for at around 4,200 kilometers. That's a lot. That's like pointing from the upper zone of Greenland all the way down to northern Mexico, and probably a little bit more. And this started at the 17 degrees of latitude all the way down to 56 degrees. And what do you think Chile is considered as an island, even though it's in the continental zone? What would be your guess?
So what is your guess? The Andes, they say, the mountain range.
Yeah, exactly. So to the east, we have the Andes mountain range. To the north, we have the Atacama Desert, the most arid zone in Earth. To the west, the Pacific Ocean, and obviously to the south, we have the Beagle Channel and Antarctica. So this allowed Chile, at least the pre-Andean flora or pre-Andean biodiversity, to get isolated, evolve, and diverge from their tropical cousins. And this provoked the level of high endemism that we can find in some places in Chile. And also, this high variability of latitudinal range also allows Chile to have different kinds of climate, topography, and determine different kinds of vegetation cover. So that's a good theoretical approach, but how somebody that hasn't been there can imagine that? And I was thinking what can I do? So I decided to describe Chile in terms of the vegetation cover using the 4 major vegetation regions. And I forgot to say that because of this high level of endemism, the central part of Chile is considered one of the biodiversity hotspots. What is the other requirement for a place to be considered a biodiversity hotspot? Can somebody tell me? So we have a high degree of endemism, a super rich environment. We also need a high degree of threat. So we could consider some places such as the northern Amazonian of Brazil to be a biodiversity hotspot, but it hasn't been so highly threatened or disturbed as the central zone or the southeastern zone of it. So continuing with the major vegetation regions, if we start by the northern side of Chile, where there is barely no precipitation, we could only be able to find shrub-like vegetation covers that every 5 to 10 years bloom in a massive event right after El Niño or La Niña events, like what happened just 2 years ago. Then if we go a little farther south, the precipitation increases and we start looking to new or different vegetation covers, as we can see in Southern California, like chaparral, or what we know as dry forest. And also I have to say that this is the region of the country that has the highest level of endemism from all. Then if we continue farther south, we have a little bit more of precipitation and we found the perfect condition for forest development. And here's where we can find mixed forests of hardwood, conifers, deciduous forests, evergreen forests, just living all together in different kinds of communities. And if we continue even farther south, we're gonna see something pretty much like what we can see here in Montana. A lot of rangeland vegetation types, a lot of shrub-likes, but also deciduous forests from a genus called Nothofagus, which is like the oaks from the eastern side of the country here. But that is only the good part of it. Now is this part of the presentation that I like the least, because all this diversity of ecosystem has been undergone through different disturbances during the past 200 years, like land use change, forest fragmentation, and lately wildfires. So this is a study that was made by Cristian Echeverria, one of the most important landscape ecologists from Chile, that assessed the level of fragmentation or rapid fragmentation of native forests from South Central Chile from 1975 to 2000. And he found that the cover of native forests was completely depleted in a period of time of 25 years. What you can see here in 1975 in green pixel is native forest, and in orange pixel is agricultural land use, and brown is exotic plantations. And they found that there was a reduction of about 70% of natural forest area only in this part of the country. there was another several studies that showed the same trend in northern regions and southern regions from this study area. This is how it would look like a forest plantation in Chile. They are not made with the natural species because most of them are hardwood and they're not as fast to grow or to produce timber wood. And we can find it in two different densities. This is the most typical one, which is medium to low density. But in some places we can find forest plantations as dense as this one, where you can barely see beyond 10 meters or 15 meters. And this is calling for a fire. This is just a massive accumulation of fuel bed. And that's the other major disturbances that we can see going on during the last 5 to 10 years. I must say that Chilean ecosystems are not adapted to fire. They are not like the conifer woods from here. And most of these fires are caused or are thought to be caused by anthropogenic actions. And as I said, there has been a massive land use change from natural forests to exotic plantations. So there is a high controversy between communities and forestry plantations. So this is one of the main reasons of why it's thought that these fires are being caused intentionally. And also Chile, at least the National Agency of Forest Management, has not the capacity to confront these fires. We don't have such a developed crew of firefighters. It's just being developed. Actually, there was a quantification of firefighters that was published just a few days ago, and it's about 6,000 to 8,000 firefighters for the full country, which is a really low number if we compare it to the firefighters here in the United States. And one really good example of the impact of wildfire in Chile was the 2017 February wildfires that is being considered the worst wildfires in the past 50 years that affected the South Central region and burned around 600,000 forests. 600,000 hectares of forest. Can anybody tell me if they have heard a quantity of burned area similar to this one? Somebody have heard something as big as that? The California fires were around the same surface of burned area. And in Chile, what we lost during last February was around 20% of native forests in the area.
There is an answer, just a moment.
Okay.
We had California, Mark said.
Yeah, the California fires, as I said, yeah. Those burn exactly or roughly the same surface and affected communities, affected not only native forests, but also productive plantation, agricultural lands, same as in Chile. So in Chile, we lost around 20% of the area burned was native forests and roughly 60% of it as well. And some of the worst example of the native forest loss was the 50% of the total distribution of one of our oldest oak species, which now is critically endangered. So there is just massive intention to try to recover it, but the situation is a little bit difficult now. So in order to make a visual example of the level of degradation of the forest, I found a really cool study that made a reconstruction of the vegetation cover back in the 1500s and how this has been changed all the way through 2007. And I made an additional, I put an additional map with the wildfires from 2017, and we can see that these are located where the highest concentration of productive activities like forest plantation or agriculture has been taking place as well. So this is an increasing concern for the government that has been aware that all these disturbances has to be overcome in some way. We cannot just leave it there. We need to find a way to develop new strategies for best practices of our natural resources management. And this is the other part of the presentation that I call a call for restoration. So having said that, Chile started taking action and signing a lot of international commitments or agreement in order to restore their degraded lands. like the Aichi target, where they pledged to restore 15% of its degraded ecosystem by 2020, the Paris Climate Agreement, where they pledged something similar, but 100,000 hectares by 2030, and they also enacted a forest policy that they pledged to restore 500,000 hectares of degraded ecosystems by 2035. And that's when you're starting to being kind of skeptical, because we don't know how far are we. At least we didn't know until 2015, when a group of scientists from the National Institute for Ecology and Biodiversity got together and made a comprehensive study on the current state of restoration experiences in Chile, and they found that there was only 60 restoration experiences, where over 60% of them had a small scale below 1 hectare of experiments, and just 2 of them were over 100 hectares. And also they were poorly monitored, mainly due to the short span of the research grants. These research grants, most of the time, last from 2 to 4 years, which is a problem that is not located only in Chile, but more globally. And having said that, I look a little bit further and review some of the documents or the data published by the National Agency for Forest Management. And I made this visual example of the quantity of plantations made with native species and exotic species between 98 and 2015. And each cell is going to represent around 1,000 hectares planted between those 17 years. So if we look at the native species, only 8,032 hectares have been planted, to an average of 472 hectares per year. And if we try to compare that to the commitment that Chile made with their forestry legislation, it would take over 1,000 years to achieve that commitment, which is crazy. And if we try to compare that with the amount of forest plantations with exotic species have been made, it's just like crazy. Oh, and I forgot to say that over 60% of those 8,000 hectares have been planted with only 4 species, which are the most handy ones. And also 3 of them are in the category of least concern. So we're using the most easy to find species and easy to plant. 2 of these species are have the quality of being drought resistant. So it's not, they don't require as much care after the establishment process. So this is how it would look like if we try to do the same exercise with exotic plantations. The only thing is that I would need around 10 slides to represent how much plantations have been done in these 17 years, with a total of 1.8 million hectares, which we would be expecting for native species, but we're really far away from that. And not just that, furthermore, they have been planted with just 3 species, Pinus radiata and 2 species of eucalyptus. And that's when all the headaches starting to appear. So having said that, that's when the challenge is starting to come out, and the government and also the researchers starting to being aware of that they have to do something. They have to develop a new strategy, or at least assess what are the current conditions, and if we're in a position to make more agreements, if we have the capacity to overcome these challenges or not. So this is the final part of the presentation, that I based it on the result of an assessment that was made by a group of researchers right after the wildfire from 2017, where they look at the challenges that Chile will need to overcome if we are trying to restore our native forest. And I said native forest because there haven't been any approach toward any other kind of ecosystems, not like sea bodies or water bodies, or how do you call the not wetlands or rangeland, just forested lands. So they made 3, or they ended up synthesizing all these challenges in 3 main bottlenecks. The first one of them is that we need to clean our habitat. We need a national plan for forest landscape restoration. And this arises because most of the restoration effort that has been done out there has been either managed by private companies or governmental companies or non-governmental companies without giving enough feedback between them, neither showing the results or their outcomes. So the solution that this group of scientists did is that within this plan or within this national strategy, we need to set a wide range of time and spatial scales in order to being able to generalize this experiment at low scale to broad scale restoration efforts. And also we need to aim these restoration efforts to restore the functionality of landscape and also the ecosystem services provision. And also the collaboration between stakeholders and encourage economic subsidies to landowners. Because that's the other thing. Nobody wants to restore the land because it's going to change the level of production. They wouldn't be able to put like pines or use it for agriculture. The second bottleneck is need for sapling. And this was covered by Karen Nelson last semester when she was talking about the lack of seedling availability, diversity, and quality in Chile. And the other thing is that we don't have as many nurseries. There is only a few of them, and most of them have been working with exotic species rather than native species. And when they're working with native species, most of them are just like 4 out of the 80-something species that we could work on. Actually, she showed these results that are data from Marcela Bustamante that made an assessment for every single nursery in Chile and show up that the exotic plantation production is just more than 4 times as much as the native species. And it's totally, and most of it is concentrated in just 3 species, which are the same that I showed up before, Pinus radiata and the 2 species of eucalyptus, and also the 3 ones for the native species that I presented before. But the other problem is that since we are not aiming to produce good quality seedlings, most of the restoration efforts have really bad outcomes. Most of our seedlings are dying because they're not adapted to being planted right away in wild areas or in areas that we are aiming to restore. So all these seedlings are being put out there and they survive probably the first season, second season, but the third season is we have like a low precipitation season, they're out and the restoration project fails. So the solution that this panel presented was the creation of new nurseries, or at least the promotion of nurseries all along Chile, and encouraging a partnership between the nurseries and the customers in order to know what species or what ecotypic variation is working better in certain areas to promote at the same time high quality seedlings for different regions or vegetational regions in Chile, and also create educational opportunities for the nurseries that are already existing in order to make them more, to make their seedlings better fitted for the intention or objectives of different restoration initiatives. And the third and last is the lack of monitoring. There are just a few of the restoration efforts have presented results, and there is a very low publication rate of their outcomes. It doesn't matter if they're positive or negative. We don't have like a database that collects all the results, and we don't know what technique or what approach that has been used could be better suited for our own objectives. And also there is a lack of design that mimic natural patterns. We're just planting in rows as the old foresters did. And also the agencies that are funding this project, as I said before, has a really short span for their studies. So just 2 to 4 years of funding would only allow these initiatives to reach the implementation process, but not follow up the outcome. And the solution that this panel presented is we need to create this database, and it has to be open access, because we can create a database that is available for somebody that can pay for it. But what happens with the low companies that are trying to make restoration in their lands and do not have access to this data? It would be just the same end. They would be just doomed to fail. And also, we need to increase awareness of long-term benefits of restoration. We need to gather that information in the long term. Because we can be using genetic material from a place that will succeed for probably 4, maybe 5, even 10 years. But in the long term, we don't know how this is going to respond to the change in the environmental conditions. And also create incentive for strategies of development. We need to create more new techniques, or at least promote the trials of new techniques. And what I'm trying to aim with this presentation, or at least what I try to aim, is not just like giving you a bunch of data to memorize or what's going on in Chile, but to encourage you to keep looking for novel approaches. We're going to be practitioners. We're going to be the next professionals that are going to be working outside there. And there is not a single recipe for restoration. So what I encourage you to do is keep looking to novel approaches, not just here, but even beyond boundaries, to share your information, and to join conferences, to join different organizations as the SDR or ESA, to keep learning through the process and while the science of restoration is developing through the years. And also learn a second language at the technical level that would allow you to share this information with more people and make this community of restoration ecologists or restoration practitioners more bonded together. And this is my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Enzo. That was really great, and I liked many of your messages. And you need to know that there is at least 27, and maybe in the meantime, maybe a couple of more came in. So people present at your talk.
That's cool.
I'm sure that there would be questions. Kind of an uncomfortable situation is that if someone has a question and it's kind of a longer one, they need to come up and ask it here.
Okay.
How about that?
It's okay.
So while people are thinking of their questions, I also wanted to mention that there's a lot of opportunities for internships in Chile, specifically in forest restoration. And so if students in Butte who are at this presentation or others within, the Montana tech community are interested, they can connect with Enzo or myself and we can give you more information.
I am actually interested in that.
Okay, great.
But just be brave, come out and ask questions. It's not, so somebody has a question? There's Mark. Okay, Scott, come on out here. What was the main purpose of what? So one of the students, Scott, is asking, what is or what has been the main purpose of using lodgepole pine?
Well, back in the 70s, the National Agency for Forest Management brought around 70 different species of pinus and also what's the name, duck fir, in order to try the level of production in different sites of Chile. So the lodgepole pine was not actually successful back then, but they didn't know about the potential, the invasive potential of it. So what happened, it got spread right after the trial and they stopped using it. It just got spread, but it's not longer being used for productive, for timber production.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. So it was kind of in among the species, and then that one actually went invasive, but it was not kind of a winner for production or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Mark, you had a question too? Yeah, you can come here and ask if you want to, because I won't hear it from there. Okay, what is it? So are there other, you said economic? Okay, so are there other economic possibilities that can actually make those plantations go away? Switch over to go, basically go away and switch over to natives.
Well, that's a really difficult position, because since conifers have a really higher rate of road rather than hardwoods, even though the quality of the wood for hardwoods is higher, the production of timber in Chile is more focused on, not in pulp, but in, how would you call the wood that you use in furniture?
Hardwood.
Hardwood.
Yeah.
Lumber.
Well, I don't think, and also the production of paper. So it's not so easy to make them change their mind in terms of what kind of species used. But what they're looking for is more like faster production and higher quantity rather than quality. And also the forestry plantation is just that their income in terms of economic revenue for Chile. The main one is mining, the second one is agriculture, and the third one is forest plantation. It only accounts for, say, 20% of the total income of the economy.
What is Araucaria used for, other than it's very beautiful? What is it? What are people using it for?
Araucaria was used. It's not longer used since the 70s, at least, because it was enacted as a natural monument. So its logging is being prohibited. But it was used for, how do you call the piece of a ship that keeps the
mast?
Umbrella.
The mast of the ship?
Yeah.
Yeah, but in terms of traditional uses, Araucaria is a hugely important ecological tree and also cultural tree. It produces this amazing nut, like a pine nut. Tell them about that.
Yes.
Yeah, huge. Sure. So, yeah, that would be like the importance in terms of wood production, but it also has a cultural importance with the Mapuche communities, because they use their piñón, which is like 4 to 5 times bigger than the whitebark pine nut or the piñón pine nut.
Yeah, it's amazing. One of the most incredible seeds on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
And it's used to make flour and different kinds of food and dishes.
Cool.
It has more like a cultural importance rather than productive importance nowadays.
Mm-hmm. Other questions? Dave? Has there been any evidence out there for mountain pine beetles for lodgepole pine out there?
No, but we have been reporting different. I mean, there is a few reports in the foliar fungus outbreaks in Araucaria araucana populations, which is thought to be produced by climate change variability. But we don't have a mountain pine beetle here. They have other kinds of pathogens.
Mm-hmm. Somebody else raised their hand? Yes?
Of the areas that were burned in 2017, how much of that is plantations again?
So of the areas that were burned in 2017, how much of that is going to be a plantation or something else?
Well, Arauco, that has the most part of the burned area, made a commitment to restore 100,000 hectares. So, yeah, that's about 1/3 of the burned area in forestry plantation.
And Enzo, of those forests that burn down, usually here, if like a lodgepole forest burns down, there's like a quite, I would say, not in our lifetime, but in a way, it's a quick recovery of those forests. They're, those pioneer seedlings, they just take over really quickly and they grow up like crazy. So there is no basically way of natural succession for those.
There could be, we could consider natural regeneration and establishment of new seedlings in the long term, but since the species that they're using are considered exotic, and they're also in private lands managed by these forest companies, they are going to replant and they're not going to leave the land there to regrow naturally. Also these lands were previously used for just an extensive time of cultivation of wheat, so the soil was already being affected or drastically disturbed even before the establishment of forest plantations. So the only thing that can grow and resprout there is just
exotics.
Exotics. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's sad. Any other questions, Mark?
Mark, yes. Fish. Then we can talk about salmon.
Yes. For the stream restoration? Yeah, so Mark is actually bringing up a good point, because you are actually having a lot of issues with the fires and forests are getting kind of degraded. There probably is a lot of runoff going down to the streams and rivers, and that kind of just brings up the question whether you say there is not much of the wetlands and river restorations, but isn't there a thought of doing that or kind of promoting that?
There is no precedent for stream restoration, not in big rivers, neither small creeks. It's just like something that has been left aside. The only thing that could be related to an increase in awareness of like aquatic ecosystem is increase in salmonid cultivation areas in like pretty much all along the shore of Chile, but not restoration initiatives. I don't know if Mark have heard of that, because there is like salmonid species have been grown down there in rivers and also in the channels in the southern part of Chile, and it has been increased. There has been an increased awareness of the environmental impact that these crops produce.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, has anyone there heard of Chile as a fishing destination?
Mark actually and Ivy, there are a couple of people here.
Yeah, right. Everybody's super excited about sport fishing in Chile. Well, guess what? Those salmon are not native. And more than that, all the rivers in the southern part of Chile are chock full of salmon.
Yeah.
Not because they're viable populations that are doing what they do in their native habitat, going, being anadromous, going out to sea and the whole romantic lifestyle of the salmon finding their way home, but because they escape the pens and they swim up the rivers, they don't spawn successfully, but there's so much pressure from these pens, the fish farming in the ocean, that they just new individuals swim up the rivers. And it's really had a huge effect on the native fish of Chile. So it's funny we think so much about the Eurasian plants and whatnot affecting the systems here, but it's our North American species that are proportionately the problems in South America.
Very cool. Can I have one last kind of more of a social aspect of social aspect of the restoration? So you mentioned a little bit about that, but what do people in general think about just changing over the plantations to natives? Is there actually a movement against that restoration? Because obviously the plantations are more productive, so why should they have the natives? So what is the people's view on that?
So actually, after the fires of 2017, there was a massive increase in awareness of communities against the role that forestry plantation have and the impact they have on watershed dynamics and also in the landscape dynamic, like ecosystem services provision. So there is a big part of the population that supports the idea of changing this, but it's not so easy to make just pression and try to change. Like, if I'm not wrong, it's 1.2 million hectares of plantations that are actively being managed right now. So there is an increase in the importance of restore native forests and nature lands in Chile, but the decision goes, or it's been taken in a different side of the spectrum, not just society. It's more like a political decision.
All right. Anybody else? Ivy. So one of the students, Ivy, asks whether there is any aid from international communities that want to help to restore your forests in Chile. Is that?
Yeah, definitely. Actually, one of the first precedents of restoration initiative was made by the Nature Conservancy in the area of Valdivia, where they tried to, well, first they got rid of a huge site of the forest plantation in an island and they restored it. That was the second restoration project in Chile. And there are other ones like Worldwide Fine for Nature and also Oikos. Yeah, there are some international non-governmental organizations that have been trying to help the National Agency of Forest Management to accomplish these commitments.
Yeah, thank you so much. Anything else? They say muchas gracias.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. That was a great talk, a great topic. We are sorry that we don't see you in person, but we really are thankful for you and for Kara also providing the service and coming up with the idea how can we save the day and how can you be kind of safer back there. And I hope to see you in the weekend. But otherwise, we just give another applause to you guys, and we'll say thank you and goodbye. Did you want to say something else, Valerie?
Only to say that we were really interested in connecting with all of you. So we are thinking about another trip over to Butte, just, for a coffee break or a
beer break.
Or a beer break if folks are interested. So Robert, we can potentially get something on the calendar.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm very serious about internship and study abroad opportunities. Chile is a cool place for folks who love the Northwest to go because it has a lot of similarities, thus why our species do so well there. But it's on the other side of the flip side of the planet. So definitely Enzo's email was up on the screen there. We'll share the presentation or just ask Robert to get in touch because we'd love to fill you in and tell you more.
Yeah,
thank you so much. So another applause for you guys.